What's up YouTube, it's Ryan from AnnihilatorMTG here, and I'm back again with some more Modern. A couple weeks ago, a viewer commented on my most recent Delver video asking if I can give 8-Rack a try. Ever since Uro got banned, the idea of 8-Rack has become more and more enticing, so let's give it a shot. First things first, let's talk about colors. I've chosen to build the deck out as Rakdos, with the main draw being Kroxa. I thoroughly believe that a card like Kroxa is way more impactful than something like Wrenchmind, and it certainly hits a lot harder than a Nether Spirit. As a threat that fuels the discard engine, Kroxa is amazing. Unfortunately, we're opting out of running Lightning Bolts. Between Prowess, Heliod, and Shadow, Lightning Bolt as a removal spell just isn't what it used to be. In its place, we're running a mix of pushes and thirsts. The thirst in particular is extremely good against Wrenn and 6, a card that single-handedly makes our win condition a pipe dream. By playing red, we also have a few more options in the sideboard. We're running a Cleansing Wildfire package paired with Surgical Extraction to mitigate some of the big mana decks, to handle go-wide strategies, and the ever-obnoxious Auriok champion, we're playing a singleton copy of Kozilek's Return, and the big head turner in the sideboard is the inclusion of Sudden Shock. Now, I just got done saying that Lightning Bolt doesn't cut it, so how in the world is Sudden Shock good enough? Well, Split Second makes this card extremely appealing. The fact of the matter is, people just aren't prepared to play around Split Second, and it feels like a wonderful tool against Heliod, some Prowess decks, and Death and Taxes, to name a few. All in all, I think this deck looks awesome, so let's hop into the first match and see how it performs. Okay, looks like we found our opponent, and it turns out to be AspiringSpike, so best of luck to you, my friend, and let's see how this goes. We'll be on the draw, and this hand is spectacular. Looks like he goes down to 6. He starts off with a Scalding Tarn into a Sacred Foundry, and we see a Clever Luminancer. Guess we're starting with the new stuff early. Let's play a Blackcleave Cliffs, then we're going to Fatal Push his creature, and we'll pass. Next we see a Steam Vents, then he casts a Manamorphose, making a blue and a red. That's Manamorphose number 2, and then a Stormwing. Luckily for us, I feel like we're in a stellar position right now. Let's play and crack a Bloodstained Mire, finding ourselves a basic. Then we'll cast a Smallpox. Let's discard a Thoughtseize. He dumps a Lava Dart. Then we're going to sack a Swamp. The Stormwing dies. And he sacks a Sacred Foundry. Excellent. We pass. Our opponent plays a Sunbait Canyon, and they ship it right back. We draw Polluted Delta. Let's play it. We're going to crack it and find ourselves a Swamp. Cast the Raven's Crime. He dumps a Lightning Bolt. Then we cast a Shrieking Affliction, and we pass. He takes 3 damage from the Shrieking Affliction. Then he casts an Expressive Iteration. Pretty cool. Monastery Swiftspear enters the Exile Zone, and it looks like he's passing. We draw Shrieking Affliction number 2. Let's retrace the Raven's Crime. Dumps a Clever Luminancer. Then we're going to play another Shrieking Affliction, and we'll pass. That's 6 damage. We see another Expressive Iteration. Let's see if anything cool comes of this. And he just scoops it up. Nice. So truth be told, I don't really know the intricacies of what our opponent's playing. I read about it very briefly on Reddit, but outside of that, I can't really say. So I think what we're going to do is bring in the Sudden Shocks and cut maybe 2 copies of Kroxa. We could bring in the Dragon's Claw, but I don't think that's necessary. Surgical's interesting, but I don't really know if we need that either. So I think we're just going to try it like this and see where this goes. And the Magic Gods aren't really doing us any favors here. I don't think we can keep this one. We'll mulligan, and this is certainly better. It's a little bit land light, but other than that, it's phenomenal. Let's ship the Kroxa, and it seems our opponent went down to 6 as well. He starts things off with an Arid Mesa, then he plays a Sacred Foundry, and a Swiftspear, sure. He moves in for an attack, that takes us down to 19, and then we draw an Inquisition. I think we're just going to play the Swamp and then thirst the Swiftspear. We pass. Our opponent plays a Fiery Islet, and then a Sprite Dragon. They swing in for 1. Let's see if there's any additional spells, and no, there's not. We draw a Blackcleave Cliffs, beautiful. Let's cast an Inquisition. We see an Expressive Iteration and a Light Up the Stage. Let's take the Iteration. Then we're going to Fatal Push the Sprite Dragon, and we'll pass. They play a basic Mountain into a Light Up the Stage. We see a Swiftspear and an Islet. I think we're doing good. Let's play a copy of the Rack. Then we're going to play the Shrieking Affliction, and then we pass. In response to the triggers, they crack the Fiery Islet, they take 1 damage from the Rack, they play the Fiery Islet, then cast the Swiftspear. Looks like they're swinging in for 1. That takes us down to 17, and they pass. We draw a Lily. Let's play the Thoughtseize. They respond with a Flusterstorm, sure. Let's cast a copy of the Rack, and we'll pass. They take 2 damage, then they cast a Manamorphose, they make a blue and a red, then they cast a Lightning Bolt at her face. The Swiftspear is currently a 3/4. They respond to it with another bolt. We are going to take a truckload of damage. We're down to 11. Then they play a Sunbait Canyon. They take us down to 7, and they pass. And we unfortunately draw another Liliana. That is not good. We're gonna pass. They respond to the triggers by cracking a Sunbay Canyon, then they crack the Islet, they take 2 damage from the rack, and at the very least they're tapped out, so we don't have to worry too much, at least not during this turn. Looks like they're moving in for combat, they swing in for 1, that takes us down to 6, and they pass. We draw a Sudden Shock, we're gonna pass in the meantime. They play a Wooded Foothills, then they swing in for 1, let's cast the Sudden Shock, the Swift Spear dies, and it looks like they're passing. We draw basic, thank goodness. Let's cast a Lily, we uptick, they discard a Flusterstorm, they take 2 damage from the rack, then they crack their fetch, finding themselves a Steam Vents. He casts an Expressive Iteration, then they play a Luminancer, we draw a Fatal Push, beautiful, let's cast it, then we're gonna uptick the Lily, they dump a Stormwing, there's 2 rack triggers, they go down to 1 from the rack, and they scoop it up, GG's. Okay, looks like we found our opponent here. Best of luck to you, my friend. And this hand is certainly slow, but I think we should be fine. We'll keep. They start things off with a Flooded Strand, then they pass. We draw another Lily. Let's play a Delta, then we're gonna pass. They crack their Flooded Strand and find a Triome. I assume this is gonna be 4 color, but it could also just be Jeskai, who knows. They play a basic mountain, then they pass. Let's crack the Delta and find a Blood Crypt. That's gonna come in tapped. Then we untap and draw, drawing an Inquisition. Let's cast it. They respond with an Opt. Then the Inquisition resolves. We see double Teferi, Cryptic, Bolt, and 2 lands. We'll take a Teferi, then we'll play the Delta, and we'll pass. They play a Plains and then cast their second Teferi. They uptick. During their end step, we're going to crack the Delta, grab a Blood Crypt. That comes in tapped. Then we draw Thoughtseize. Let's cast it. We see Bolt, Bolt, Cryptic, and a Steam Vents. Let's take the Cryptic. Then we're going to cast the Kroxa. We'll stack the triggers. I assume they're just going to dump a Bolt, and they do, and then we pass. They uptick the Teferi once again. Then they play a tap Steam Vents. We draw Fatal Push. Let's play the Castle. Then we're going to jam a Lily. We uptick. Let's dump the push. They discard a Scalding Tarn, and then we'll pass. They choose to downtick the Teferi. They play a Scalding Tarn, and they pass. Let's uptick the Lily, discard a Swamp, they dump a Sacred Foundry, then we escape the Kroxa. They respond by casting the Lightning Bolt at the Lily, we stack the triggers, that takes them down to 16, they crack their Scalding Tarn, finding themselves another Triome, they sacrifice the Teferi to bounce the Kroxa, then they play a Colonnade, and they pass. We draw the rack, let's uptick the Lily, we'll ditch the Smallpox, they lose a land, we're going to cast the rack, then we'll jam the Kroxa, we stack the triggers, that takes them down to 12, and then we pass. The rack takes them down to 9. They play a Wall of Omens, and it looks like they're passing. We draw a Castle. Let's Edict them. Then we're going to play the Castle, and we'll pass. They take 2 damage from the rack, and they cast a 5-mana Teferi. They followed up with an Opt, then they uptick. Let's activate a Castle. We find a Thoughtseize. They pass, and then they get to untap 2 lands. They cast a Lightning Bolt at the Lily. We find a Shrieking Affliction. Let's cast a Thoughtseize. We take their Cryptic. Then we jam an Affliction. We cast Lily number 2. Then we uptick, and we'll ship it back. They take 3 damage from both the Affliction and the rack. They're down to 1. They choose to uptick the Teferi. Then they cast a Wall of Omens. That replaces itself. Then they play an Opt at Sorcery Speed. They've got 2 cards in hand, and they scoop it up. Nice. So playing against Jeskai, I think we can trim on the Fatal Pushes, and I think maybe 1 copy of Raven's Crime to bring in the Angrath's Rampages and the Surgicals. We could bring in the Soul Guide Lanterns instead of the Surgicals, but I think Surgicaling a Cryptic Command or something like that would be really good. Same thing with like a Teferi or something. Yeah, this should be fine. This hand is incredibly land heavy, but this might just be one of those scenarios where we decide to keep it. Yeah, we'll give it a shot. Looks like they kept 7 as well. They play a tap Triome, and then they pass. We draw Delta. Let's play a fast land into an Inquisition. See what we got. Charm, Remand, and a Wall of Omens. Let's take the Charm, and then we'll pass. They play a basic Plains, then they cast a Wall of Omens. Beautiful. The wall replaces itself. We draw a Bloodstained Mire. That's kind of insane. Let's play a basic Swamp, then we're going to cast the Smallpox, discard the Delta. They dump a Sacred Foundry. We're going to sacrifice a Swamp. They lose the wall, and they sack a Plains. Nice. It's kind of weird of them to actually discard a land. That's a little bit surprising. Let's see what they've got. We see a Cascade Bluffs, sure. Then they cast another wall. Honestly, wouldn't mind another Smallpox. We find a Raven's Crime, that'll do. Let's cast the Raven's Crime targeting them. They dump a Lightning Bolt. Then we're going to retrace, ditching a Bloodstained Mire. They discard the Big Teferi, beautiful. So their hand is Remand and 2 unknowns, if I'm not mistaken. They play and crack a Flooded Strand, finding themselves an island. And they play a 3-mana Teferi, brutal. They uptick. Then they pass. We draw a Shrieking Affliction, that'll do. Let's play the castle. Then we'll cast the Affliction and retrace the Raven's Crime. They dump the Remand. Then they take 3 damage from the Affliction. They return the Wall of Omens. Then they recast it. They're back up to 3 cards. They play a basic land. We really need a Smallpox or something. We find a Polluted Delta. So I think what we're going to do here is just play the Delta so we can activate the castle. Because truth be told, a single Raven's Crime is not going to beat the Teferi plus Wall of Omens. That's just the truth. They uptick their Teferi, and it looks like they're passing. So let's crack the Delta. Then we're going to find ourselves an untapped Blood Crypt. This is for the potential Kroxa. Then we're going to activate the castle, and we find an Inquisition. Guess that's better than nothing. And a Lily. That might work. Let's cast the Inquisition. They purge the Shrieking Affliction, sure. We see a Cryptic and a Flooded Strand. Let's cast the Lily. I think we're forced to Edict them. They lose the wall, and then we're going to pass. So their hand is Flooded Strand, Cryptic, and an unknown. They uptick their Teferi, and then they pass. We draw a swamp, let's uptick the Liliana. They dump the Flooded Strand, and I guess we're just going to pass. During our end step, they cast the Cryptic, targeting the Lily and drawing a card. So while we have minimal cards in our hand, we're going to activate the castle. We find a Kroxa, sure. Then the Lily gets bounced. They've got 4 cards in hand. They play a basic island. We draw Thoughtseize, beautiful, let's cast it. They respond by drawing 2 cards with a charm. We see a Teferi and 3 lands. Let's take the Teferi. Then we cast the Lily. We uptick, ditch the Kroxa, and then we'll pass. So we're weirdly stabilizing here. They uptick the Teferi. Their hand is 2 lands and an unknown. They pass. We draw a castle. I think we're just going to play it, then we're going to uptick the Lily. They ditch the Scalding Tarn. Then we're going to attempt to escape the Kroxa. They respond with a Remand, sure, and then we'll pass. Alright, so far so good. They've got 3 cards in hand. They uptick the Teferi once again, and they pass. We draw a Bloodstained Mire. Let's start things off by retracing the Raven's Crime. They discard a land. Then we're going to uptick the Lily. They dump another land. Then we'll escape the Kroxa one more time. It resolves. Let's stack the triggers. That takes them down to 12, and then we'll pass. They sacrifice the Teferi to bounce the Kroxa. That's a fair trade. Then they cast the Opt. I'm hoping that we don't see a Jace here, and we do. They brainstorm. They've got 2 cards left in hand. They play and crack a Flooded Strand, finding themselves a tap land. Then we draw a Shrieking Affliction. That might do it. Let's ult the Lily. We're going to separate the piles like this. They sack the Jace pile, beautiful. Then we'll cast the Shrieking Affliction and jam the Kroxa. We stack the triggers. They dump a Teferi, and then we'll pass. They take 3 damage from the Affliction, and they scoop it up, GG's. Alrighty, looks like we found our opponent here. Best of luck to you, my friend, and we won the die roll. Let's go second. This hand is a little bit light on lands, but so long as we draw 1 or 2 more, we should be fine. We'll keep. To get things started, our opponent cycles a Street Wraith. That takes them down to 18. Then they play a Polluted Delta, and it looks like they're passing. We draw a Delta of our own. Let's play and crack a Polluted Delta, finding ourselves an untapped Blood Crypt. Then we're going to cast a Thoughtseize. They crack their Fetch and Response, and find themselves an untapped Steam Vents. And then they play a Stubborn Denial. Whoa, okay. I have a feeling our opponent's going to Thought Scour themselves, and then play a Gurmag Angler, but that should be fine considering we're playing Smallpox. Our opponent plays a Bloodstained Mire and then cracks it immediately, finding themselves a Watery Grave. That takes them down to 12, and then they play a Channeler. We find another Polluted Delta. Let's play and crack it, grab a Swamp, then we're going to cast a Smallpox. I think we're going to ditch the Liliana. They dump a Watery Grave. Let's sack a Swamp. They lose the Channeler, and they sacrifice a Steam Vents. Beautiful. We'll pass and see what they got. They play another Bloodstained Mire, and it looks like they're shipping it back. We draw a Blackcleave Cliffs. Let's cast an Inquisition. They respond by cracking their Bloodstained Mire and finding themselves a Blood Crypt, sure. They flash out a Snap, that's very interesting, targeting a Stubborn Denial, and we see a TBR and a Bloodstained Mire. Let's take the Battle Rage and then we'll pass. They play their Bloodstained Mire, then they swing in for 2. That takes us down to 13. They pass. We draw a Fatal Push, beautiful. Let's play and crack the Delta, grab a Swamp, then we're going to push the Snap. The snap dies. Then we cast a Kroxa. In response, they crack their Bloodstained Mire and find themselves a tapped Blood Crypt. Let's stack the triggers. They dump another TBR, and we'll pass. So far, so good. They play a Shadow, beautiful, and then they pass. We find a second Smallpox. Let's cast one of them. We ditch the Smallpox. We both take 1 damage. Let's sack the swamp. They lose the Shadow, and they sacrifice a land. Let's see if they found another one. They cast a Mishra's Bauble, then they pass. Before we draw, they crack the bauble targeting us, and we find a Fatal Push, sure. We pass, and they draw off the bauble, and it looks like they got nothing. We find another swamp, let's play it, then we're gonna pass. They've got 3 cards in hand. They play a Thought Scour targeting themselves, and they pass. We draw Delta, nice. Let's play it, then we're gonna crack it, finding ourselves a basic swamp. Then we'll escape the Kroxa, exiling a bunch of lands. We'll stack the triggers. They respond with a Fatal Push, sure. Then they dump a Thoughtseize, and then we're gonna pass. They play another Thought Scour, hitting a Shadow and a Thoughtseize. Then they cycle a Street Wraith. That takes them down to 4. They're paying costs, and they cast a Shadow, nice. We untap and draw a Shrieking Affliction, and that should do it. Let's cast the Affliction. Then we're going to Sorcery Speed Fatal Push the Shadow, and then we'll pass. Take 3 damage from the Affliction. They're down to 1. They basically can't do anything here, and it looks like they scoop it up, nice. So playing against Grixis Shadow, I think we want to get a little bit creative. So we're going to bring in the Rampages and the Soul Guide Lanterns. Then we're going to cut 1 each of the Rack, Shrieking Affliction, and then I think a Raven's Crime, and then maybe a Thoughtseize. Yeah, that actually looks pretty good. So I think in a matchup like this, we're basically going to keep any hand that looks even a little bit good, and this certainly qualifies. It seems our opponent agrees. They start things off with a Mishra's Bauble. They crack it, targeting themselves. Then they play a Polluted Delta. They crack it immediately, finding themselves an untapped Watery Grave. Then they cycle a Street Wraith. That takes them down to 15, and they cast an Inquisition. So I think this is likely a choice between the Lily and the Shrieking Affliction, and they take the Lily. They draw off the Bauble, and we draw the Rack. Let's play a Swamp, and then we'll cast it, and then we're just gonna pass. We'll yield to the trigger. They've got 6 cards in hand, make that 5. They play and crack a Scalding Tarn, finding themselves an untapped Blood Crypt, and they delve away for a Gurmag. Alright, hopefully we can draw Smallpox as we find a Thoughtseize. Well, we might as well cast it. Let's jam the Thoughtseize. They have a Gurmag and a Cling. Let's take the Gurmag, then we'll jam the Raven's Crime. They discard a land, and then we'll pass. They've got a Rack trigger that takes them down to 11. They decide to play their Scalding Tarn, then they swing in for 5 with a Big Fish. That takes us down to 13. We draw a Swamp, nice. Let's retrace the Raven's Crime. They discard a Lightning Bolt, then we'll cast a Shrieking Affliction, and we'll pass. They crack their Scalding Tarn, finding themselves a Watery Grave that comes in tapped. And this is certainly going to be a close one, I think. They cycle their Cling to Dust by exiling our Lily and not the Raven's Crime for some reason. That's weird. Let's stack the triggers. They take damage from the Rack, then the Shrieking Affliction. They're down to 5. They swing in with a Big Fish. That takes us down to 8, and then they pass. Nice. We draw the Castle. Let's retrace the Raven's Crime. They discard a Thoughtseize. Then we'll do it again, discarding another Thoughtseize. So them not clinging the Raven's Crime was a huge mistake, and they take 6 damage for lethal. GG's. Alrighty, looks like we found our opponent here. Best of luck to you, my friend, and we won the die roll. So we get to go second, and this hand looks pretty good. Seems our opponent agrees. They play an untapped Watery Grave, and then we see a Hedron Crab. We find a Shrieking Affliction. Let's play a fast land into a Thoughtseize. We see an Archive Trap, a Fraying Sanity, another Crab, and a Visions. Let's take the Visions. Then we're gonna pass. They play their second Crab, and then put a Swamp into play. They've got 2 triggers. That mills us for a bunch, and then they pass. We draw another basic Swamp. Let's play one of them, then we're going to cast the Thoughtseize. We see a Fraying Sanity, a Glimpse, and a Trap. Let's take the Glimpse. Then we're going to retrace the Raven's Crime by ditching a Swamp. They get rid of the Trap, and then we'll pass. They draw for turn, and they ship it right back immediately. Let's retrace the Raven's Crime. They dump a Crypt Incursion. Then we're going to play a Blackcleave Cliffs, and we're going to cast Shrieking Affliction number 1, and then Shrieking Affliction number 2, and now we're off to the races. They've got 2 triggers. That takes them down to 15 and then 12. They've got 2 cards in hand. They cast a Visions. We draw Thirst. Let's cast it, targeting the Ruin Crab, then we'll play the Rack, and we'll pass. They take 1 damage from the Rack. Let's see what they're gonna do. They play a basic island, and then target us with the Hedron Crab, and scoop it up. Nice. So playing against Mill, I have zero idea how we want to sideboard. I think one thing we might consider is bringing in the Rampages and maybe cutting a couple of Kroxas. They're gonna mill us for a ton anyways, so we're bound to see them in the graveyard. Other than that, I think we can just resubmit. And this hand looks absolutely spectacular. They start things off with an untapped Watery Grave into a Crab. Sure. We draw Fatal Push. Beautiful. Let's play a fast land, then we're going to push the Crab, and then we'll pass. They play and crack a Polluted Delta, finding themselves an island. Then they cast a Glimpse. They mill us for a bunch. We see a Kroxa. Alright, no problem. We untap and draw another Kroxa. So first things first, we're going to lead off with a Thoughtseize. We see double field, double vision. Let's take one of their visions. Then we're going to play and crack a Bloodstained Mire, grabbing an untapped Blood Crypt. Then we Inquisition them, take the other visions, they draw for turn, they play a Crab, then they put a field into play, and they pass. We draw the Rack, let's jam it, then we're going to cast the Smallpox. Let's ditch the Inquisition, we'll sacrifice the Swamp, they lose the Crab, and they sack the field. Nice. They take 3 damage from the Rack, they've got 1 card in hand, we draw a Blackcleave Cliffs, let's play it, then we'll cast the Kroxa, we stack the triggers, and they scoop it up. Nice. And there you have it. It's been a long time since I've played an 8-rack deck, and let me tell you, it was a lot of fun. I definitely feel like there are a few more iterations of this build that could be fruitful in the metagame. Golgari seems interesting to me, and the new Orzhov cards will likely fit right in. I want to give a shout out to AspiringSpike for being a good sport in this video. You guys are probably already subscribed, but if you're not, head over to his channel and show him some love. Finally, if you enjoy my content, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. This stuff really does help, so thank you. And as always, stay safe out there and have a good one.